Hi guys, what I'm doing here is just milling some malt. So what we've done there is just grind some through the mill. That mill just cracks them grains open. What malt is, this is what it looks like. It looks like barley. It is pretty much barley, but what's happened is it's been germinated at a malt house. Germinated to the point where a sprout just starts to emerge and it gets roasted, in this case at about 100 degrees. And what that does is just changes the starches to invert some of those sugars to make them into a more fermentable variety of sugar. So this is all about crushing that malt down, not too much, just cracking the grain in half so that during the mashing process, which is part of the process of beer making, that the water in the mash tun can have access to all of those grains, but the internal contents of the grains. So we don't want too much flour because that'll stick the mash, it'll make it hard to drain the water out, drain the wort out. You just want it enough so that it's cracked in half. This is pale malt. So this is the main body from all beer. About 90% of all grain bills is pale. This is Munich. Munich's a slightly higher temperature roasted malt, and it adds a more of a bready flavour to the beer. So this is what has already been. This one's already been crushed. That's how it comes out. So you're not going for like flour. You're going for just a crumble. You just want the grains to be sort of split in half. So here's the overall setup, and I'm just grinding this batch. This will be about 10 kilograms of grain altogether, and this will make about 75 litres. Right, so moving into the mashing part, what I've done here is I've got a container head up in water. This is an insulated esky, and what we're aiming at is 73 degrees. So you want 73 degrees centigrade, and you want that to be quite exactly that temperature, because you've only got about 5-degree window, or up to 10-degree window, for the mashing process to be suitable. So we're taking the malt that we just cracked, pouring that into the water, into this 73-degree water. Now when you add the malt, especially if it's pale malt, but it's less effective, it's more heavily roasted, but with pale malt you'll immediately lose around 12 degrees by putting 10 kilograms into 40 litres. You lose about 10 degrees in temperature, so this mash will come out around 60 degrees at the end after all this malt is added. So it's just a matter of pouring it in and letting it sit for an hour and a half at 60 degrees. Hi guys, so we're just returning to that grain bed. We've finished the mash now. It's been an hour and a half, and the mash has been sitting there at a nice consistent temperature. That's the grain still in there, and we need to begin what we call the lautering process and the sparging process. So what that is draining off all of that liquid that's been sitting there for an hour and a half with the grain. We're filtering that out through the bottom, a false bottom in the esky, and it's coming out nice and hot, still around that 60 degrees. And we're just going to drain that off into the tub, and then that's also going to get rinsed with another 40 litres of water. So we're just getting all of those what are now sugars through the mashing process to turn the starches into sugars through alpha and beta amylase breaking down then large long chain starch molecules into shorter sugar molecules. So what we're seeing here is a very, very sweet end product of the mash, and then we'll rinse that too, and you'll see soon what that looks like when it's done. So we've got all of that drained out now. We're aiming at about 80 litres here. This is roughly 80 litres in the tub, and we're just bringing that to the boil. We put 2 immersion heaters in. The immersion heaters are those things you can see hanging off the side of the tub, and we're just bringing that up now to the boiling temperature. But before you get to boiling temperature, there's quite an interesting phenomenon called the hop break. So there's just the empty grain bed there. So we've got all of that water out of there. There's a bit of residual foam and whatnot. Actually, the grain bed's a really important feature in that it helps filter out some of those larger proteins as well. So filtering through the grain bed's very important. What you can see here is as we approach boiling point, some of those proteins that are sitting in the wort start to denature, and in doing so they create a foam, and this is called hot break. And this is a more advanced version of hot break here. So we're starting to get to the point where we can add the hops. You don't really want to add the hops before hot break. You want to wait for that to happen. It's a nice creamy head that develops, but it does disappear as you progress to the full boil. That will break down, and you'll end up with just like a muddy, yellowy coloured liquid, you lose that foam altogether. So here we go, hop break at its full extent. We're going to chuck some hops in. This is some hop pellets. This is called Citra. There's 90 grams of Citra here. Citra is an American hop, developed in the mid-90s, but only become popular in the last decade or so. There's real citrus, like a grapefruit sort of flavours, citrus flavours. It's very popular. I don't know if anyone's ever tried Cooper's Session Ale, very similar to that. So this is what I'm trying to aim for here, is a pale ale with some Citra flavour. So Citra goes in. It's a very bitter hop. After an hour we boiled, so after an hour we're going to cool down. So that we've put in the immersion cooler, which is a copper coil. We have water flowing in from the tap, cold water flowing in, and the whole idea of that is to bring that wort down as quickly as possible so we can then get into the fermenters. And here we go, in the fermenters. Well, you lose a lot of water when you're boiling, so you've got to add some. So we lost probably about 15% of the wort in that hour boil. So you've got to top up again, get your volume back up to that initial volume, otherwise you'll end up with a very strong beer. So you want to make sure you keep some control over concentration and how much sugar's in there. You don't want to make it too rich. So we've got to water back down again, just using the saucepan out of the tap, ladling it in, and just bringing that volume back up. So we've got 40 litres in each fermenter. Once we've got that right, then we can start thinking about chucking the yeast in. It's very important to do all of this as quickly as possible. The beer is most susceptible to infection during this time when it's cold, but before the yeast is pitched. And if you don't pitch the yeast soon, then the beer will adopt yeast that's already in the air around in the room or in the environment, and you'll start to get some wild yeast in there. So we're adding Safal US-05. This is a American ale yeast made by a company called Fermentis. Because of the volume here, I'm doing 40 litres in each fermenter. I put 2 sachets in. Now you don't want to underpitch. It's very bad to underpitch, and if you don't put enough yeast in, then you can end up creating some very unpleasant flavours in the beer as the yeast gets stressed. So you want to make sure we've got enough in there, otherwise you can make a starter. We're just pitching the yeast here. As soon as we've got the yeast in, we're just going to chuck them lids on, put the airlocks on. So that's all sealed now, and they'll sit there for a couple of weeks.